Religion isn't collapsing in fire and chaos like some dramatic prophecy. It's dying in silence. Not with riots in the streets, but with a quiet shrug. People aren't storming out of churches in anger. They're just not coming back. And here's the strange part. It's not happening because someone proved God wrong in a lab. It's happening because fewer people feel they need God at all. Think about that for a moment. In the early 1990s, only about 6% of Americans said they had no religion. Today, over 30%. And among young people, that number shoots even higher. So here's the question. What changed? Why are entire generations walking away from something that once ruled their families, their laws, even their very sense of identity? Because the questions have changed. It's no longer, who created us? It's, how do we live better right now? And when prayer feels as useless as an umbrella in a hurricane, the old answers don't cut it anymore. But if religion really is dying, what replaces it? That's where things get even more surprising, because the answer isn't emptiness. It's something much more powerful. The numbers don't lie. If you want proof that religion is shrinking, you don't need prophecy. You just need math. In the early 1992, only 6% of Americans said they had no religion. Today, that number has climbed to over 30%. That's not a minor shift. That's tens of millions of people quietly checking the box marked none. And it's not just the United States. In Europe, entire countries have become almost post-religious. In Sweden, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic, churches still stand tall, but inside, empty pews, empty prayers. Even in places you'd least expect it, cracks are showing. In Brazil, once overwhelmingly Catholic, the fastest growing group is now no religion at all. In India, where temples dominate the landscape, more young people privately admit they don't believe. And in Iran, despite the government enforcing Islamic law, a growing number of young Iranians are quietly skeptical, even defiant. This is a global trend. And here's what makes it shocking. Religion isn't being forced out by violence or toppled by revolutions. It's being walked away from, step by step, choice by choice. But the numbers only tell part of the story, because what's really killing religion isn't just how many people are leaving, it's why they're leaving. And that's where things get even more revealing. The real loss isn't attendance, it's interest. It's easy to assume the decline is just about fewer people showing up on Sundays. But here's the truth. The real collapse isn't in attendance, it's in interest. Because people aren't leaving one church to join another. They're leaving religion altogether. Think about it. For centuries, the question was, which faith is true? Today, the question is more often, do I even need faith at all? That shift is huge. It means people aren't just doubting a pastor or disagreeing with a doctrine, they're losing curiosity about the whole idea of the divine. Belief in angels, miracles, heaven, hell. It isn't being disproven in a courtroom. It's evaporating in living rooms, in classrooms, in coffee shop conversations. Not because someone shouted, God isn't real, but because fewer people feel that God matters. And here's the subtle danger for religion. Indifference is far more powerful than anger. Anger still means you care enough to fight. Indifference means you've already moved on. So if interest is fading, what took its place? Why did entire generations stop asking about eternity and start asking about something else? That's where the real break begins, when old answers don't fit new questions. For most of history, religion had the answers. Who made the universe? God. What happens after death? Heaven or hell? Why do bad things happen? Divine plan. Simple, comforting, until the questions changed. Because now people are asking different things. Not, who created us? But, how do we live better right now? Not, what happens after death? But, how can I make the time I have more meaningful? And when those are the questions, the old answers don't fit. Telling someone to just pray during a crisis used to feel like guidance. Today, it feels like handing them an umbrella in a hurricane. When a loved one is sick, people don't want promises of miracles later. They want solutions now. When the world is on fire, they don't want prophecies. They want action. This is the heart of religion's crisis. It still tries to solve modern problems with ancient words. But those words were written for people who thought the earth was flat and disease was caused by sin. And here's the cliffhanger: religion can't escape. Once people realize the old answers no longer work, they start looking elsewhere. So, where do they turn? That's where the internet and critical thinking change everything. The internet and critical thinking. Not long ago, if you had a question about life, you went to a priest, a rabbi, or a holy book. Today, you type it into a search bar. And that one change, that tiny shift in where people turn for answers, is one of the biggest reasons religion is losing ground. Because the internet doesn't give you one sermon, it gives you 20 perspectives in seconds. Science videos, history forums, podcasts, personal stories, all lined up, ready to challenge the one truth you were told growing up. And once people start comparing answers, something happens. They notice contradictions. They notice that other cultures have their own sacred texts, their own one true path, and they can't all be right. That's where critical thinking sneaks in. And here's the thing religion doesn't want you to realize. Faith relies on early conditioning, social pressure, and the fear of consequences. But when the internet opens the door to curiosity, those walls start crumbling. Because doubt spreads faster than dogma. And once you see a crack in the foundation, you can't unsee it. So what happens when ancient belief systems collide with modern values? That's the next crack in the wall, and it's even deeper. Religion, stuck in time. Religion calls itself eternal truth. But eternal truth doesn't age well when it's written by men in ancient societies who thought thunder was the voice of gods. And that's the problem. The texts never updated, but the world did. Ideas about women, sexuality, gender, science, human rights, modern life moved forward. Religion stayed stuck. And when ancient rules collide with today's values, people face a choice. Do I keep pretending these old words fit the modern world? Or do I let them go? More and more, people are choosing to let go. Because here's the catch. When religion tries to modernize, it exposes the problem even more. Churches rewrite rituals, reinterpret scripture, change their tone, but people can sense it. It's not the wrapping that's outdated. It's the content. You can repaint a crumbling wall. You can cover the cracks with gold. But sooner or later, the foundation gives way. And once people realize the eternal truth was really just ancient opinion, the authority vanishes. But if the message is breaking down, why do so many still cling to it? That's where the mask slips, and hypocrisy enters the story. Hypocrisy and scandals. If there's one thing that kills trust faster than doubt, it's hypocrisy, and religion has been drowning in it. People see preachers condemning sin on Sunday, then exposed for scandals on Monday. They see churches hoarding gold, real estate, and tax exemptions, while entire communities go hungry right outside their doors. They see leaders talk endlessly about love, forgiveness, and humility, but spread division, shame, and fear when the cameras are off. And here's the brutal truth. When your message is, "We hold the moral high ground," every scandal doesn't just hurt, it destroys credibility. Because if the shepherd can't live by the rules, why should the flock? Religion survives best in the shadows, where questions aren't asked, where doubt is shamed, where contradictions stay hidden. But the world today is lit up. Scandals trend online in hours, not decades. And when people see behind the curtain, when they realize the leaders don't live the sermon, the entire stage starts to look like a theater. So people stop listening, not out of hatred, but out of exhaustion. And here's the twist. Most people leaving religion aren't angry at all. They're just done. Which brings us to the quietest, most devastating force pulling religion apart. Indifference. Quiet disbelief, not angry atheism. When people imagine someone leaving religion, they picture rebellion, slam doors, angry debates, fiery atheists with microphones. But that's not what's really happening. The true threat to religion isn't rage, it's indifference. Most people who walk away don't hate their old faith, they simply outgrow it, like a pair of shoes that once fit, but now pinch with every step. They may look back with a mix of nostalgia and affection, the childhood songs, the holiday traditions, the sense of community, but they're not going to wear those shoes again. And here's the devastating part. When you ask them why, their answers aren't filled with bitterness. They're filled with nothing. The myths didn't speak to me. The rituals felt hollow. The rules just didn't match real life. That indifference is far more final than anger, because anger still needs the other side. Indifference means you've already moved on. And yet, this raises a bigger question. If religion is fading, what takes its place? If the pews are empty, what fills the gap? The answer might surprise you, because it's not chaos, and it's not despair. It's something far more human. What fills the void? Here's what many religious leaders fear: that without faith, life will feel empty. But when people leave religion, most don't fall into chaos. They build something new, and often, something stronger. Instead of morality handed down by authority, they create ethics grounded in empathy. Instead of community bound by ritual, they form communities around shared values. Instead of obedience to dogma, they choose honesty with themselves and others. And far from being selfish, it's often more generous. People volunteer, care for neighbors, fight injustice, not for a heavenly reward, but because it's the right thing to do. Religion once claimed to be the source of meaning. But meaning doesn't vanish when belief does. It shifts. It becomes personal, chosen, real. That's why the decline of religion doesn't look like a moral collapse. It looks like people taking responsibility for their own lives. They don't need a divine command to love, to protect, to be kind. They just need each other. And this isn't happening in small pockets. It's global. Which brings us to the next revelation. When you look at entire societies, the data tells a story religion hoped you'd never notice. The global pattern. Step back from individuals for a moment and look at entire nations. The pattern is undeniable. The countries with the lowest religiosity, often the safest, happiest, and most stable places on earth. Sweden, Japan, Norway. They have some of the lowest crime rates, the highest levels of trust, and strong social safety nets. Not because people fear divine punishment, but because they've built systems of fairness and cooperation on their own. And that flips an old warning on its head. For centuries, religion told us, without God, morality will collapse. But the evidence says the opposite. Morality didn't come from religion, it came from human experience. From learning how to live together, reduce harm, and build trust. Religion codified some of those lessons, sure, but it also twisted them, adding rules about clothing, sexuality, diet, and obedience that had little to do with compassion. So when people leave religion, they don't lose morality. They refine it. They stop making exceptions for cruelty just because it's in scripture. They stop defending injustice just because it's called tradition. They start asking, what's actually right, not what's merely approved. And that shift is spreading worldwide, which raises the final, unavoidable question. If the global trend is away from faith, what's the ultimate fate of religion itself? The final shift. Religion isn't collapsing all at once. It's retreating step by step. First from the schools, then from the laws, then from the home, and finally, from the heart. And here's the haunting part. When people look around after religion leaves, nothing collapses. Life goes on. In many ways, it even gets better. Because what once felt like a sacred center turns out to have been an illusion. A structure propped up by habit, fear, and tradition, not by necessity. For centuries, religion was tied to survival. It explained storms, justified rulers, unified tribes. But science, democracy, and shared culture replaced those roles. What's left today is mostly ceremony and control, and people are less interested in both. Even the rituals, weddings, funerals, naming ceremonies, are quietly moving towards secular traditions. People still want to mark life's big transitions. They just don't want mythology attached to it. That's why the decline feels unstoppable, not because religion was violently overthrown, but because it was quietly outgrown. And here's the twist. When people stop pretending to know answers from above, they finally start asking better questions from within. And that, not faith, not dogma, is where real growth begins. So, is religion really dying? Not with fire and fury, but with silence. With private doubts whispered late at night. With millions quietly realizing they don't need permission from above to live meaningful, moral, connected lives. And that's the real story here. Religion isn't being torn down, it's being outgrown, step by step, choice by choice, until one day people look around and realize the center once held by faith is empty. And yet, nothing collapsed. In fact, life carried on, freer, kinder, more honest. But that leaves a bigger question hanging. If religion no longer defines morality, where does morality come from? And how do we know we're heading in the right direction without a map from above? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next video. For now, if this made you think, if it opened a door you didn't expect, do one simple thing: subscribe. Not for dogma, not for blind belief, but for more questions worth asking. Because in a world where old answers are fading, curiosity might be the most human thing we have left.